Stacey is a pioneer in performance measurement. She's going to tell us how we can measure the immeasurable. She suggests that leaders should always seek the truth. And one way to do this is to use plain words when setting goals and objectives, so everybody can understand it. Her approach delivers significant returns on investment. She gives us an example where it's over 4,000%. And she includes 3 tips to help us all get started in an evidence-based leadership and decision-making world. Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We're here to help you and your organization understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Pharro, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. My guest today is Stacey Barr. Stacey is a specialist in organizational performance measurement and evidence-based leadership, and she's the creator of the PUMP performance measurement methodology. She helps leaders develop a roadmap to articulate, measure and cascade a meaningful direction that engages and aligns the whole organization. Her professional passion is to help people measure the immeasurable, including intangible, qualitative, vague goals, which we will hear about more later, instead of relying on trivial measures or none at all, so they can say they can get the job done. Welcome, Stacey.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Richard. It's a pleasure to be talking with you about this, and you really nailed what my passion is.
Good. I mean, one of your passions is this thing about measuring the immeasurable. Can you give me an example of an immeasurable goal? And how do you make people make them measurable?
Absolutely. Immeasurable goals are everywhere. In all honesty, you can open up any strategic plan and find immeasurable goals in there. Let me give you 3 examples that I think really illustrate the problem that we have with how we write goals. And it's not just strategic goals. It can be operational, team goals, process goals, whatever. So here are a few examples. First one is from a military organization. Provide efficient, unique, unbiased, and responsive high-quality support. Another one, yeah. Another one from a government education department. Strengthen student engagement and learning outcomes by enhancing student support and intervention services. Mm-hmm. And a third one is from a library association. We will be a leader in articulating and characterising the dynamic system of scholarly communication. So these goals, like if I were to put you on the spot, Richard, and say, tell me how to measure them, I'm pretty sure we would have silence for quite a period of time and you wouldn't know how to answer the question. And the owners of these goals would be in exactly the same boat.
So how do you then go about doing that? You must break it down into smaller chunks, do you?
In a way, you're absolutely right. And the chunks that we look at to break down are the words that we've used. So this is the common thing with an immeasurable goal. They're almost always written with vague words. And I call these vague words weasel words. And I borrowed that term from a gentleman named Don Watson, who is an Australian, was an Australian political speechwriter and is the author of many books. But there are 2 in particular that have to do with weasel words. The first one's called Death Sentence, The Decay of Public Language. And the second book is Watson's Dictionary of Weasel Words. Both are very entertaining reads, but he's so right. We write goals with weasel words and then we say, oh, the goal's too intangible or too qualitative to measure. It's not the truth. Goals don't have to be written with weasel words. We can say what we really mean by the goal in language that's much more specific, much more descriptive. And to give a benchmark of the kind of language that we should be writing our goals with, I would say if a 10-year-old can understand it or come close to understanding it, we've nailed the right level of language. But you're right, Richard, there is a process that we need to go through to make an immeasurable goal measurable. Would you like me to walk through an example?
Yeah, I'm fascinated. I'm also interested to know, what does the creator of that very high-level strategic goal say when you tell them that it's not understandable by a 10-year-old and you got to rewrite it?
Oh, well, the first thing they'll often say is, we can't dumb these goals down, they actually are really important. And my answer to that is, yes, you're absolutely right. They are very important. But do you know that the majority of people in the workforce have a literacy level equivalent to a 10-year-old? And you want these goals to be understood by those people, not just understood by those people, but also to have these people know how to contribute to the achievement of them. If they don't understand them, they're not going to be able to do that. And what do you think the likelihood is that they're going to come up and say to you they don't understand that? They won't. I've spoken to both camps. I've spoken to the employees that don't understand them, and they would say, there's no way I can say that to my senior executive, I don't understand this. He'll think I'm a complete idiot. And the executives are absolutely shocked to know that their employees don't understand the goals. So it's a real problem, and that is exactly how I would respond to someone who said to me, 10-year-old language? You're kidding, right?
So what is your process?
Well, let's start with another very common vague goal. It kind of reads along the lines of, we want to improve workforce capability. A lot of organisations want to measure workforce capability. And it is hard to measure meaningfully because the way it's written, it's not actually a goal. It's way too broad. And it's an overused phrase that people, they just find it too broad to pin down with a measure straight away. So what they will do in desperately trying to find a measure is they'll try and look for, trivial statistics, and they'll count something like the number of people trained. Or they'll just go for what's relatively easy to measure, something they've already got being measured, like employee turnover. Or they'll say, no, we're coming up with these really fancy measures like employee talent index, but they won't have any concept for how to quantify it. They haven't gone to that level of figuring out exactly what is it counting. So they get stuck. They end up with measures that are not really telling them what they need to know, or they've got really fancy sounding measures that never end up with any data, so never inform their decisions. And, the truth is that we can't do that. We can't go and look for existing measures. We've got to really understand what we mean by something like workforce capability. And it means different results. It's not one thing. It's actually several things. So that's the first step, really, Richard, is I recommend people start with, what are the results that this weasely goal really implies? And let's continue the example. So what could workforce capability mean in different organisations? What are some of the results? One might be the match between our people's skills and the skills that are required of the roles or positions that they're in. How closely do those two things match? Another might be the match between our people's current skills, but the skills that we require for the future. If we're a future-oriented organisation and we're hoping to become something else in the future, there's a set of skills that we know we're going to need to have. How many of those skills do our people currently have? Or a third one could simply be, how well do people do their tasks versus how well do the tasks need to be done? So if we can start breaking it down, you said that before, how do we break this down? We've got to break it down not just by looking at the words, but by understanding what we really mean. And often vague, immeasurable goals mean more than one thing.
That's fascinating. I know you've been interested in evidence-based leadership for a long time. So this is really evidence-based management, evidence-based delivery. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair way to sort of describe it? And with the advent of more data analytics, is there more adoption of this approach in the workplace? And are more people coming on board with your view that you've got to have some very clear evidence about your goals? The impact that the work is benefiting the organisation? How do you get that across to that leadership team?
When you mentioned data analytics, I just that fascinates me because my background is as a research statistician. So back in the olden days when I was a research statistician, we called it data analysis. It's analytics now, and it sounds cooler. And it's fundamentally the same thing. It's applying mathematical processes to get insights out of data. And it's fundamentally important to evidence-based leadership or evidence-based management or fact-based decision-making. We could call it any number of things. The idea is that the data analysis or data analytics is important because what quantitative information does for us is it brings a level of objectivity into the information that we can use, which isn't there when we're only relying on the qualitative forms of information like stories and anecdotes and hearsay and opinion and even experience, which has a bit more validity than hearsay. But those qualitative things are still important in decision making, but the objectivity comes from the data. The data can show us things we can't see with our human senses, basically. It's vitally important, but I'm not sure if this surprises you, Richard, but I thought there would be a tight relationship between the rise of data analytics at the moment and the adoption of it and the practice of evidence-based leadership. But it's not as tightly correlated as I had thought.
I think it comes back to your earlier comment. The difficulty is actually having reasonable measures that people believe.
Yeah.
And I think most of us have some measures, but then we say, oh yes, but don't forget this and don't forget that. So actually breaking it down to, this is a number. This is a number we can count accurately. Forget all the noise, but let's just focus on this and how we're doing against that number. And people don't like it. People want to obscure, I think, that target to make it easier to demonstrate that they've achieved it.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with a book by Jeffrey Pfeffer and Robert Sutton called Hard Facts, Dangerous Half-Truths and Total Nonsense.
No, but I think it sounds like something I should read. So thanks for that recommendation.
It's a really good read. One of my favourite quotes from that book is this: leaders need to make a fundamental decision. Do they want to be told that they're always right, or do they want to lead organisations that actually perform well? And that is a philosophy in a sense. It is a fundamental decision, like the authors say. It's a philosophy that sits behind the meaning that we're going to give to data analytics or performance measurement or both of them. They should work together. They should both not obscure the facts, but rather lead us to insights about the things that really matter so we can make decisions about the things that really matter. But that can only happen in the presence of that philosophy that we want to lead organizations that actually perform well. It's a tricky thing and it's not a common thing to find leaders that are really ready to make that decision.
No, I can understand that, because I think there's different drivers, aren't there, these days in business? Are you driven by the top line regardless of where the revenue comes from? Or are you driven by strategic initiatives that you brought in that are about developing the organisation for the future?
Yeah.
And it's all of those things in the mix, and then the various stakeholders involved. So it is challenging, but at the same time, I think if we don't have that clarity, then how do you know whether you're actually performing against the strategy? How do you know you're performing against the plan? So the whole idea of, I think, evidence-based decision-making is so key, but so difficult.
It is difficult. We're human after all. I just can't help. I stay behind this and I stay committed to it and passionate about it because I can't help thinking how different the world would be if every leader of every organisation was an evidence-based leader and was comfortable and courageous using data to know the truth, and when the truth wasn't happy truth, to be able to do something about it and make things better. If every leader in every organisation had that approach, I think the world would be dramatically different and a very exciting place. I think so many of the problems that we have and continue to have as a species on this planet would be long behind us. Sure, we'd have new problems, but we'd just have such a constructive and collaborative way of dealing with them. So I think that's probably behind my passion for all of this ultimately.
I saw something yesterday. A colleague of mine has just launched, he published on LinkedIn that he's suggesting people can measure their carbon usage in a project. Mm-hmm. And, there's a little questionnaire. So I went into the questionnaire, scale of 1 to 5. And I could only measure 1, as in we don't do it. And I contacted him to say, where's the guidance on how I measure this? And of course the answer is that's coming. We don't have it. And there's a whole host of things that we should be able to put some metrics to, albeit fairly broad, that could make a significant difference about how we're all going about helping to achieve the climate goals, helping to achieve some of those big social challenges that we face. But as you say, it's just too difficult.
It's amazing you mentioned that example. Just 2 days ago, I had a conversation with someone I'll be collaborating with soon to work out how we can use the existing data in organisations as proxy measures for things like a carbon footprint. For example, you can imagine that in the accounting system for organisations, they're tracking the number of kilometres that vehicles are travelling. They're tracking the the flights that are being taken, and how much, I don't know how much paper's being used, I'm not sure. But there are ways to know the quantity of that stuff that's being consumed and being done, and they're proxy measures for carbon footprint. So sometimes we can look at data that we already have in a fresh way and realise that it still can convince us of how well we're going in the right direction when it comes to typically hard things to measure, like our environmental impact. It's very exciting. I love that idea.
I'm sure someone will crack it. There will be a host of then different models, because everyone would argue their model is the best. And it would be good if we could actually just all get behind one model to then have that consistent data across the world. But who knows?
Merge the learning together,
Coming back to PUMP, if an organisation adopts the PUMP methodology, can you calculate return on investment? Can you demonstrate that they've got good value out of moving towards PUMP?
Absolutely. I mean, it'd be ironic if we couldn't, because PUMP is about measurement. It's about knowing. So if the result that we want to measure is, does PUMP make a worthwhile difference in our organisation and therefore deserves more investment, then of course we can measure it. And, well, I can give you one little case study of how it was measured. I met a gentleman named Steve in a pump workshop that I taught years ago in Fort Worth in Texas. And he led a measures team to fix a process where people who wanted to become flight controllers, they sit in the flight control tower and they control the planes leaving and arriving at an airport. Not everybody passes that exam, and those people who fail it have to be placed in new roles because they're not going to be placed in the flight tower. It's a good thing, I think, that we have people passing exams to become flight controllers. But anyway, Steve and the team used PUMP to write the goal to reduce the time that it took to place these training failures into new positions, because it was costing a lot of money to the organisation because they had to pay these people. But these people were sitting around doing nothing productive for months. In fact, the average amount of time that it took for them to find a new job after failing the exam was about 67 days, but it was 67 days plus or minus 50 days. So it was a really chaotic system. Management set them the target to reduce that down to 21 days. And in 7 months, they improved the process to get training failures into more suitable roles. They got it down to 20 days. And what they worked out from that first 7 months was that they'd spent around $12,000 for both for the PUMP training and for the time it took them to implement PUMP to come up with this solution. And they also, in those first 7 months, managed to save the organisation about $500,000 in lost productivity. So when you combine those figures together into a classic ROI calculation, you get a return on investment of 4,067%. That's pretty darn convincing if you ask me. But that's exactly the process you follow to figure out if PUMP's working. Are you actually able to get massive improvements for the small investment in learning and applying a proper methodology like PUMP?
And is it fair to say that your clients do get, to use your word, massive improvements rather than just incremental change?
Yeah, they can. And usually, Richard, the massive improvements come early on, because when they bring PUMP into an organisation, it's an organisation that's never really taken performance improvement very deliberately before. They've just done performance improvement projects and hoped that they worked. They get a bit of anecdotal evidence that maybe it was good. But when they are ready for PUMP, they're actually ready to take improvement seriously. And because they're taking it more seriously, they're doing the improvement more deliberately. Maybe they're going to, do Lean Six Sigma or take some more scientific approach to how they do improvement. And that is how they get the biggest wins early on, the biggest gains. But the incremental improvement continues into the future. So it's still over the long term, it's still a very worthwhile return on investment for sure.
Stacey, clearly there's an issue with leaders appreciating the value of evidence-based. So you have an opportunity now to give leaders that are listening to this podcast 3 tips. What would be the 3 things that you think a leader should actually do to enable them to benefit from this philosophy of evidence-based leadership?
I reckon playing with a few simple ideas is probably the best starting point for any leader that's a bit fascinated by this whole idea of evidence-based leadership. So I think three practical tips for what to start playing with would be these. The first one I'd say is stop going out and searching for related metrics. Don't start the conversation about measurement with measures. All the metrics that you'll find out there in databases or on websites or whatever, they're just everyone else's ideas about what's easy to measure or their top of mind ideas, and definitely not the best evidence of your organization's unique goals. So that would be number one. Just quit doing that. Save your energy. Tip number 2 would be don't try to measure goals that are weasely, like improve change management or build great relationships. Don't try and measure those things as they are. Every goal that you have that you care about and that you want to measure, be clear about the specific results that matter to you and rewrite those goals to say what they really mean using 10-year-old language. So, something like employees have the knowledge needed on how to change, or our internal customers always collaborate with us to solve their problems. State the thing that you want, and that will be the basis for finding measures. And the third tip would be don't just sit there then and brainstorm measures for those lovely, clear, specific, measurable results. Instead, think about how you'd recognize those results happening out there in the real world, because really measures are quantifications of what we can observe or detect in the real world. You can't measure what you can't see or touch or hear. So describe those things that you would see or touch or hear or detect in some way if those results were happening. And then simply say, well, how could we quantify that? And that will be the key to finding the measure. So that would be my top three tips. I think they're just start practicing those.
You're a pioneer in this field of performance measurement and evidence-based leadership. I think you were. I mean, you've been doing this for some time, and I'm not aware of many other people sort of with your reputation and approach to this. But if you look back, what 3 things that you know now would you have liked to have known when you started in this discipline?
I think the first thing kind of relates to what you were suggesting, that it kind of looks like pump and the work that I'm doing is kind of not all that common out there in the world. There are not a lot of people who specialize in performance measurement, and my clients and my team, we are yet to find another true measurement methodology that does what pump does. The first thing I wished I'd known when I started out is to trust that pump was a really robust and powerful measurement methodology, and that I didn't have to go into each client thinking that I had to tailor it for each organization. It's true, every organization wants to have their uniqueness appreciated and celebrated, but that doesn't mean that they're so different that pump's not going to work for them. In fact, what I've learned and wished I'd known from the very beginning is that pump is perfect to help every organization, as unique as they are, to find the goals and measures that are exactly right for that uniqueness. So that would be number 1. Number 2 probably relates to something we've kind of touched on a bit, Richard, that, measurement is quite confronting to a lot of leaders. If they haven't made that fundamental decision to lead organizations that actually perform well, adopting something like pump's really hard. So I think early on, if I had better understood that, if I had appreciated it, then rather than assuming that everyone was a truth seeker like I am, I probably could have focused more on finding more truth seekers like me and building a larger and stronger body of evidence of how pump really does transform organizations, so that the people who aren't truth seekers can at least follow in the path of those that have really done the right thing with measurement and truly become evidence-based organizations. So that would be the second thing. I just wished I'd understood this earlier and had more compassion for it and been able to lead the way a little bit more differently than how I have. You asked for 3 things. I think something I wished I'd known early on is to have connected with more leaders in the beginning, because my background and therefore the network that I had were practitioners. We do the measurement work. I never was a leader in an organization. So my network grew from that, planting those seeds with the people that were the practitioners like me. So strategy professionals, performance measurement professionals, quality and improvement, and Six Sigma people. These people know and love and want better measurement, but they're stuck with getting the message across to their leaders. And I think if I had connected better with leaders earlier on, I could probably have a better understanding of measurement from the leadership perspective. And who knows how that would have changed how pumps spread around the world, but it certainly would make it a lot easier for the practitioners to be able to get a foothold and get pump really working for their organizations. So they're the 3 things. That was a really good question, by the way.
Thank you. Fascinating answers. I can certainly relate to your first one about everybody saying we're different. My background is in project management, and the number of people that would say, we're going to build a jam factory, so we need a project manager who can build a jam factory, who's built a jam factory. And you say, but a factory is a factory. You don't find many people with that specific skill, and they get hung up about the uniqueness of their challenge rather than an appropriate solution to their challenge that may involve a number of different skills or a number of different people to come together to deliver it. No, and because, as you say, if you haven't got the leaders behind the initiative, then it's very hard for anyone else in the organisation to drive it through.
Yeah.
So what is the biggest challenge you would like to be asked to solve then? I mean, we touched on some of the global challenges people have, but what would be your dream assignment at the moment? If the email pinged today and someone says, Stacey, can you come and help us find a way to measure the following problem? What would it be?
I would come at your question from a different angle, and I wouldn't think about it as an assignment or a potential client. I'd think about what is the difference that I'd want to make in the world? And if there was another organization that could help me make that difference, what would I jump at and say yes to? Can I answer that question instead, Richard?
That's a terrific... thank you for helping me with my question. That's a great question. I look forward to a great answer.
I think it's really about understanding this leadership challenge of why truth is so confronting and difficult for them to handle. I am pretty attached to this idea of wanting more leaders to embrace this idea of evidence-based leadership, to make that decision that Pfeffer and Sutton posed, and to choose the path of leading organizations that actually do perform well. If there was a research organization that had a lot of global leverage, that really wanted to find out who are those leaders, what are they like, how did they come to be the kinds of people that would take that decision and be courageous and really value evidence and fact and truth in making decisions, and how could we extrapolate those learnings to help other leaders become more like that? That is what I would like to be a part of and contribute to. I mean, my work's about performance measurement, but fundamentally it's about seeking the truth and being open to the truth and using the truth to make the world a better place. So, yeah, any organisation that was heading down that path. And I think the key is to understand how leaders are making that decision. I think that would really grab me.
And is there any way any interested leader could get started? I mean, do you have information on your website? Is there anywhere they could go for a source of information and inspiration?
Absolutely. There are 2 free resources, actually, that will go into a lot more detail than we have in our conversation, Richard, and a lot more detail than those 3 tips I shared. I've got a short video course called The 10 Secrets to KPI Success. Some of the things I've just shared are some of those secrets, but there are more, obviously. So access to that free course, and also the free ebook version of my first book, Practical Performance Measurement, which goes through a lot of what pump is about and how it works. Those 2 resources are freely available to anyone who wants to sign up for them. And I've got a link on my website that they can go to, which is simply staceybarr.com/APMG. Go there, sign up, and you'll immediately get access to both of those resources.
Stacey, it's fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for your insights and views on everything is measurable, even if we think it is immeasurable. So thank you very much.
Oh, it's been a great conversation, Richard, and I love the angle that you've approached it from. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.